So again, good afternoon, and thank you for joining us for today's briefing on the Hill Country Land, Water, Sky, and Natural Infrastructure Plan. I'm Josh Sendejar, the manager for the Texas Hill Country Conservation Network. And as part of today's briefing, we're welcoming members of the media, elected officials, and some of our network partners to go over this new resource from the network. For those of us joining today's briefing, please feel free to use the chat to let us know who you are, what organization you work with, and where you're joining in from. If you have any questions during the briefing, please feel free to use the Q&A box so that we can keep track of those questions as they come in. Today, I'm joined by three speakers who are going to go over some key aspects and takeaways of the Natural Infrastructure Plan. First, I'd like to introduce Katherine Romans, Executive Director of the Hill Country Alliance and co-chair of the network. I'll let Katherine introduce our remaining speakers and begin the briefing.
All right, thanks so much, Josh. Can everyone hear me okay? Wonderful. Well, as Josh said, my name is Katherine Romans. I'm the Executive Director of the Hill Country Alliance, and I'm joined today by Rachael Lindsey, the Director of Science and Stewardship with the Hill Country Conservancy, and Suzanne Scott, the State Director of the Nature Conservancy in Texas. We are just a small snippet of a much wider organization of both nonprofits, government agencies, businesses, and individuals that are organized together through something called the Texas Hill Country Conservation Network. The Hill Country Conservation Network was really born out of research that was completed back in 2016 and funded by the Cynthia and George Mitchell Foundation that looked into the full landscape of nonprofits, businesses, agencies, and universities working across Central Texas on the conservation of our land, our water, our wildlife resources, and our rural communities in this special part of Texas. From that original research in 2016, a group of nonprofits really came together in 2019 to formally launch the Texas Hill Country Conservation Network. And the logos that you see represented on this slide are the steering committee members of the network. This is our formal governance structure that kicked off in 2019. In all, though, there are more than 50 organizations that are working together to advance conservation in the Hill Country through this network. Many of our partners are on the call today, so I wanted to give a special shout out to all of those nonprofits that are a part of the network and really that make the network run. Our mission through the Hill Country Conservation Network is to maximize the protection of the Hill Country's natural resources through enhanced collaboration. We recognize that we face some big challenges in the Hill Country, and this network is allowing all of us to get closer to protecting the Hill Country resources we want to hand on to future generations of Central Texans. The very first major project of the Texas Hill Country Conservation Network was actually released a year ago, and it was this State of the Hill Country report. This report looked at 8 key metrics from across the region, ranging from the total number of conserved acres in the Hill Country to the gallons per capita per day of water used in our region's cities and towns. And what we found in completing this report in 2022, that we are a region that is growing and that is growing outward. We have a population of roughly 3.8 million residents in this 18-county region, and we're projecting to add another 1.5 million residents by the year 2040, adding roughly 35% of our current population. Those new residents are not moving to downtown Austin and San Antonio. They are, for the most part, moving outside of incorporated areas. So the map on the slide here shows the growth in just the unincorporated areas, those areas outside of existing cities and towns, looking from 1990 to 2020. So while we grew as a region by about 50% in this time frame, you can see that in our unincorporated areas, the population grew by upwards of 190% in some of the fastest growing counties. That means significant changes coming to the landscape of the Hill Country, a region that for so many is defined by its natural resources, its flowing waters, its rolling hills, its historic ranch lands and working farms, the rural communities of the Hill Country. More and more, our region is being subdivided and developed, and increasingly covered up by impervious surfaces. From 2016 to 2019 alone, in that 3-year period, we lost 115,000 acres of open space in the Hill Country to development. While this represents some exciting new opportunities for our region, no one wants to say no to good economic growth and development. It means new opportunities for Hill Country residents. It means new folks that are choosing to live here because of the quality of life that the Hill Country affords. It also represents some serious challenges for those very natural resources that define this region. The message I hope you'll leave here today with is this: while we need affordable housing, schools, grocery stores, community amenities, and built infrastructure in the Hill Country, we also need a critical focus on how we're protecting the most important natural infrastructure that our region has to offer. In many ways, that is a low-cost way to ensure the quality of life and the resilience that we'll need moving forward in Central Texas. So that's a little bit of context for the current report that we're going to be talking about today. We looked at an 18-county region of Central Texas, from Austin down the I-35 corridor to San Antonio, and then all the way west to Uvalde and Edwards counties on the western extent, and up to Mason and San Saba counties on the northwestern extent. This is an 18-county region, more than 11 million acres in total, and roughly 4% of this landscape is permanently protected. You can see some of those conservation lands that are outlined in green on this map. Looking by the numbers, the Hill Country it has the headwaters of 12 of Texas's rivers. It has more than 1,100 miles of pristine streams. You can see numbers around the population growth that we're anticipating in the Hill Country, and just the huge volume of visitors, folks that come to this region to enjoy the natural resources that we so love. The region is increasingly known for its dark skies and the ability to see the stars at night, and the Hill Country has 12 designated dark sky places with 14 Friends of the Night Sky groups. Those are volunteer-led groups that are based in counties around the region. You're going to hear a lot more about the natural resources of this region, but we like to think of the Hill Country as really the beating heart of Texas. So I'm going to turn it over now to Suzanne Scott with the Nature Conservancy, who's going to talk a little bit about what exactly we were looking at when we talk about natural infrastructure.
Thank you, Katherine. So what is natural infrastructure? You can see a definition here, but basically nature-based infrastructure are practices that protect, restore, and incorporate natural features or processes into the built environment. Relying on the function of natural systems as we grow and develop will improve the overall health and resiliency of the Hill Country while supporting a more sustainable quality of life for its residents. Nature remains one of the best solutions to help meet the state's growing needs for clean water, air, access to green space, and safe community development, while also preserving the unique character of the Hill Country for its current and future residents. The natural infrastructure plan calls on decision makers to incorporate protection of sensitive natural features such as open space, dark skies, rivers, aquifers, floodplains, and grasslands as they consider development plans that can incentivize and incorporate nature as communities develop. Nature can be designed to meet functional aspects of our growing communities that are traditionally met by traditional infrastructure. We can now use nature in a functional way that can result in improved water quality, flood management, air quality, biodiversity, human health, and quality of life. Protecting and enhancing our natural infrastructure provides cost-effective environmental, health, social, and economic benefits. Let's look a little bit more detail at those multiple benefits. Nature provides very important benefits in the environment, health, economic, and social. And when we did the natural infrastructure plan, it relies on data from residents of the Hill Country. And overwhelmingly, the people who live, work, and play in the Hill Country value this multiple benefits that can come from natural infrastructure. For example, the environmental benefits may be the most obvious. Protecting land and water and wildlife is good for natural systems. The economic benefits, these highlight the economic returns that nature provides, including sustainable tourism, which is extremely important to many of our Hill Country communities, improving soil health and grazing for crops and livestock. Having more shade and open space can also save on water and energy cost and reduce the risk of flooding. That nature can also allow for stormwater to soak in rather than running off, yielding better overall community resiliency. Studies show that for every $1 invested in conservation, $4 to $11 are returned in natural goods and services. Social and health benefits are equally as important and highlight the value of connecting people to nature, providing recreational value, protecting cultural connections to the land and water, as well as reducing the impact of heat, promoting improved air quality, storing carbon. Spending time outdoors is linked to reduced stress, improved moods, increased physical activity, and even improved sleep. Being outdoors can also boost your immune system. And we came in touch with that directly during the pandemic. Just getting outdoor made us feel a whole lot better about ourselves, our mental health, and in turn, we are also can improve very important chronic conditions such as heart disease and diabetes. Next slide. You can see all of those things I just mentioned here in this slide, but basically looking more comprehensively at these overlapping benefits, there are many, but the greatest of all is the protection of our cherished land and water resources of the Hill Country. Simply put, nature's benefits cannot be overstated. Next slide. So you can see in this illustration that we are advocating for a more deliberate recognition of the function that nature provides in our Hill Country environment. This illustration points to many of the natural features that are serving as key components of our infrastructure. Programs like the City of San Antonio's Edwards Aquifer Protection Program has protected more than 176,000 acres from development by working with landowners to preserve open space and protect recharge, to preserve important drinking water supplies through the use of conservation easements, for example. Recently, our friends in Kendall County, those voters approved funding to support a similar program to work with landowners to preserve open space, and Texas voters will soon be asked to approve $1 billion to acquire state parkland which also, of course, provides important conservation of the landscapes of Texas. You can see in this illustration the relationship between land protection and water protection, both groundwater and surface water, and protection of working lands, grasslands, habitat, biodiversity, preserving dark skies, and ensuring the availability of recreational opportunities for enjoyment of residents and visitors alike. The environmental benefits of nature versus traditionally built infrastructure includes preserving open space, to filter sediment and pollutions out of rainwater runoff, reducing water quality threats to our rivers and creeks and aquifers, while also, as I mentioned earlier, improving recharge and enhancing our water supplies. Communities, businesses, and properties are safer when floodwaters have more room to disperse over riparian areas and floodplains. They act as sponges. They absorb the water, slow it down, spread it out, soak it in. It reduces flash floods and releases the water over time. Riparian habitats and local green space can help soak up those floodwaters, stabilize soil, and protect against erosion. The urban heat island effect is also a very important concern in our communities. We just saw on the news today that our planet just experienced the hottest day on record ever yesterday. Building roads and other paved surfaces have replaced natural features. They hold in the heat, they increase temperatures over time. Access to the benefits of nature, such as clean air and cool air and reduction of heat, it shouldn't be a luxury. This is something that we all need for our health in an environment that's ever growing. We are called upon our community leaders to recognize, with the pressures of development in the Hill Country, we must take deliberate actions to preserve the incredible value that nature can provide. Actions include promoting ordinances and incentivizing the reduction of impervious cover and other hardened surfaces, and promote green space and through design standards that can protect dark skies, encourage nature-based designs, and really just think about the value of nature as it relates to our quality of life. When it comes to our communities, nature can be that source of resilience. Nature's ability to adapt and evolve is unlike any other. The natural world doesn't just improve our health, it helps protect us and keeps us safer and gives us the ability to recover faster. So with that, I'll turn it over. Thank you.
Well, hey, everybody. We heard from Katherine and Suzanne that we're a region with incredible opportunities, perilous threats, and natural infrastructure that's critical to sustaining harmonious human populations. This iconic hill country has active conservation and stewardship advocates from a wide variety of organizations who have created numerous plans and documents to inform our work. There's been over 1.4 billion in voter approved conservation since 1990, and there's growing interest and support every day, which requires us to have common language and strategic action. The Texas Hill Country Conservation Network came together to alchemize this variety of individual work happening in the Hill Country, and this land, water, sky, and natural infrastructure plan is our most recent collaboration to streamline, align, and lift our common goal of protecting and sustaining our iconic Hill Country's natural resources for human generations to come. Our environment is a necessity, not a charity. Next slide. We conducted a network survey in February 2022 to determine the 6 goals of this plan. Extensive outreach for a community survey took place from May to early August 2022. Over 2,800 Hill Country residents shared their perspectives during the planning process, including farmers and ranchers, elected officials, representatives of nonprofits and public agencies, and residents from big cities and small towns across the Hill Country. Results from the community survey were used to weight and prioritize the 6 goals, as shown with those big percentages in the middle of each of those 6 goals. Protecting water was by far the highest priority natural infrastructure goal. This includes both protecting water supply, that first priority at 26%, and protecting water quality, the second priority at 23%. There's a widespread concern about drought across the region, and we all know that our hill country droughts are always broken by massive floods. There's a huge opportunity for us to lean into water as a common rallying cry for our conservation work in the hill country. The specific data layers used in mapping from these goals were weighted and selected by the mapping team. See those smaller percentages on the right that are within those color bands of each of the individual goals. And each of these goals has its own map within the plan where you can see what prioritization for protection for each specific goal looks like. And then there's also a map within the plan that shows overall criteria of all 6 of these goals weighted as seen, which gives you a prioritization map for that. Next slide. This map is one of the 7 from the plan that are related to those goals specifically, and this shows that highest prioritization goal, prioritization of lands for water supply protections. The layers that informed this prioritization include aquifer recharge and contributing zones, which is why that area south and east of the Edwards Aquifer shows up in really light blue. That's the Blackland Prairie. Streams that contribute inflows to drinking water reservoirs. So the lighter color on this map is the lowest priority for protection, and the darkest color on this map is the highest priority for protection. So streams that can contribute to inflows for drinking water reservoirs, other streams, perennial named streams and rivers, and buffering those public water intakes is what led us to this map that prioritizes that water supply feature and goal of the plan. Within the natural infrastructure plan, you can find more maps like this one and that overall criteria with all 6 goals combined. Next slide. Unfortunately, we don't have time to go through all of the maps that are included in the plan today. There's a ton of resources available to assist with planning, strategizing, convening, and building our hill country community. These are 2 more examples of maps created for the plan to help with those efforts. The one on the left is access to outdoors and nature, and this gets to some significant equity concerns in the hill country. We have an increasingly urban population, and parts of our hill country population are in poverty. So the layers that we used for this map were providing open space to improve public health, preserving open space in or near low income and underserved areas, improving access to aquatic recreation opportunities, and prioritizing protection of areas furthest from existing public lands. So high ranking on this map, that dark green color means there's a high need and opportunity for more access. Edwards County shows a high priority for this conservation goal. That's the one on the far left of the map, the huge county. Due to 2 of those parameters. One of those is preserving open space near low income and historically underserved areas. And the second is preserving open space to improve public health. This same thing applies to Uvalde and Medina counties down there along the south, and Bexar County around San Antonio. On the right side of this slide, you see a map about increasing temperature, and this shows those 4 counties on the I-35 corridor from San Antonio in the south to Austin in the north. And this is a urban heat map. So you can see those colors on the map correspond to the amount of heat generated in that area. And you can see it turns more green, which is less heat in those surrounding areas that have that natural infrastructure that's absorbing the heat, like Suzanne talked about. So this map and the maps like this really highlight the important places in the corridor for that natural infrastructure investment to address flooding, extreme heat, etc. Next slide. Dark skies in the hill country is one of the most fun to talk about because it's pollution that can be eliminated overnight just by shielding lights, flipping switches, turning them off. Unlike most environmental challenges, which take more detailed, nuanced, and time-consuming solutions. This map is an example of how bringing awareness can gather our community behind the common goal where we already have solutions that are easy to implement. Dark skies are an attractant for people to move to the hill country and are threatened by that development that's happening surrounding our cities and towns. Thinking back to Suzanne's slide with the 4 big buckets of natural infrastructure, dark skies allow us to easily behold the wonder of our universe, connect us to our environment, improve our human health, and allow us an opportunity for ecotourism and bringing new homeowners to this area, which boosts our economy. Light pollution is caused by overly bright outdoor lights that shine when and where they're not needed all the time. When we reduce light pollution and preserve our view of the night sky, we also save money, protect our health, and improve the safety of our communities. Those call outs on the map showing different locations is the international dark sky places that are listed. So much is happening right now in the hill country to protect night skies, and cities are really impacting those rural areas on the map. So this is a nexus that is a metaphor for all of the work that we're doing within this natural infrastructure plan. Next slide. What is perhaps most exciting in these maps that are provided in this land, water, sky, and natural infrastructure plan is our county by county breakdown, which depicts each county's conservation priority areas. Dark green is the highest priority, and the acreage of that dark green area in that county is shown in that top left green bubble. Light green is also a high priority area. And then it also shows existing conservation and public lands, which are those orange blobs that you see on the map. Developed areas, you can see the grayish shading in the lower left-hand corner of the Kendall County map, which is the city of Bernie. You can see some small dots around Uvalde and Nipa and yes. And we also have several statistics for different conservation metrics, which are listed down there at the bottom of those county maps. So we have percent developed in the county, the rate of population growth, the percent conserved, public investment in conservation, diversity index, people in poverty, and social vulnerability. These 2 counties, Kendall and Uvalde, make an interesting comparison. You might notice that both counties have the same diversity index, 43%, which is determined by the census and is the likelihood that 2 people chosen at random within the county will be from different race and ethnicity groups. But you might notice that Kendall County has less than 7% in poverty and a 3.6 social vulnerability ranking, while Uvalde County has more than 20% in poverty and almost 96 social vulnerability. Very different demographics, which require that these counties approach conservation with different priorities and opportunities. You may also notice that there's a lot more green on the Kendall County map. This is primarily due to the high potential throughout the county for aquifer recharge and these streams' contributions to Canyon Lake, which is a major water supply. You also might notice that Uvalde County has a lot more protection than Kendall County, but has not made any public investment into conservation. This is because the city of San Antonio has been protecting large ranches over the Edwards Aquifer Recharge Zone in order to ensure sustainability of San Antonio's drinking water supply, which is entirely groundwater. Kendall County also, excitingly, as Suzanne said, had a $20 million bond this year to go towards open space protection. Okay, next slide.
All right. Thank you so much, Rachel. Woo, you did a fabulous job of describing some very complex maps. And as Rachel alluded to, there is much more in the full report, which I encourage everyone to check out online at ourtxhillcountry.com or .org. As both Rachael and Suzanne mentioned, there's some real key takeaways from this report and from the whole process that took more than a year in the making. The first and perhaps foremost is investment in natural infrastructure is really a low-cost way to protect our region's drinking water, to mitigate flooding, to increase quality of life and improve access to the outdoors, as well as protecting our view of the stars at night and so many other benefits. It's hard to capture on one slide. Central Texas has strong support for investment in conservation. As we mentioned, with 2,800 respondents to our survey, 85% supported increasing public funding for conservation. Rachael talked about the $1.4 billion that have been approved by Central Texas voters over the last 30 years or so. In that time frame, we have only had one public funding measure that has not been approved by Central Texas voters. So overwhelming support. The benefits of natural infrastructure are not enjoyed equally across racial, socioeconomic, and urban and rural divides. It's critically important that we create more access for folks to get out and enjoy the full benefits of natural infrastructure. The Texas State Park System, as many who live and work in the Hill Country know, is oversubscribed. We often have long lines, and you have to sign up months in advance to get your access and campsites for state parks. And so creating more opportunities for folks to connect to nature in the Hill Country is critical. I also want to emphasize that action can be taken both locally and regionally to reduce our overall footprint and increase the function of our natural infrastructure. We'll talk here about some kind of next steps, but that's an important piece that each of us has a role to play in improving natural infrastructure in the region. So what's next? We've got this great report. It's a year in the making. What is the plan? Well, first and foremost, the conservation community is going to work to accelerate investment in strategic conservation at the local, regional, and statewide level. You've heard several times now about the wonderful opportunity and success in Kendall County with their 2022 bond measure. We know that there are plans underway for Travis County to have a similar bond this year. And we know that there's a statewide opportunity for voters to approve a Centennial Parks Fund that would dedicate $1 billion to the creation of new state parks statewide. And of course, we'll be working hard to pull some of those dollars into the Hill Country. We are really focused on how we can support elected officials on driving incentive-based policies to protect natural infrastructure. It's important to emphasize that we are all about using incentives and working with willing landowners who are interested in using conservation as a tool for their properties. We will be working to emphasize low-cost solutions to flooding, to drought, habitat loss, and air quality concerns. As I mentioned, elected officials have an outsized role to play in this conversation, and I'm particularly grateful to see several of our local elected officials on the call today. Thank you so much for your time and interest in this work. We hope that the maps, that the resources that we've pulled together through this report are a tool that can be used with local officials in mind. And then finally, we really want to increase equitable access to the benefits of natural infrastructure. That means bringing natural infrastructure to where communities in need are. It means addressing things like urban heat island and access to nature. It means creating connectivity between parks and trail systems, and really thinking about the benefits across the whole spectrum of users and residents in the Hill Country. So exciting things ahead, and we are really, really excited to be finally rolling this report out. Before I get to our questions, I just want to thank the team that was a part of making this report possible. We worked with some consultants. First and foremost, Land and Water Connections Consulting. Amy Morris was just a phenomenal project manager. I hope Amy is on the call today. She really herded the cats through this process and did a fabulous job at it. Geo5 Designs was our GIS mapping expert, and Michael Sisko with Geo5 was just wonderful to work with. And then Asakura Robinson really helped in the outreach and the creation of the survey and getting all of our outreach materials in both English and Spanish to reach a diverse set of Hill Country residents. Thank you to the team at Asakura Robinson. None of this work would be possible without our funders. And so a big thanks to the funder community that supported this work. The Cynthia and George Mitchell Foundation, as I mentioned, they were critical in really the foundation of the Texas Hill Country Conservation Network and supported this work. The Birding Johnson Foundation, the Hershey Foundation, the Shield Heirs Foundation, the Stillwater Foundation, the Land Trust Alliance, and the Water Funder Initiative all were part of making this work possible. And finally, because we couldn't possibly fit every name and organization on one slide of the folks who contributed to the creation of this report, all of our network partners, the individuals who participated in committees, who responded to surveys, who helped to review the report. Thank you, thank you, thank you. We have a whole section of the report dedicated to those names, so I would encourage you to check them out. As I mentioned, you can find the full report at ourtxhillcountry.org. You can also find the State of the Hill Country report there, that report that we talked about at the very top, as well as information about the Texas Hill Country Conservation Network, the partners associated with the network, and how, if you are interested, you could be a part of the network. So with that, I will wrap our formal presentation. It looks like we've got one or two questions, probably more questions in the Q&A and chat. And I wonder if Josh or Leah from the Hill Country Alliance team might be willing to be our moderator for the Q&A portion.
Absolutely. Thank you to our speakers. Thank you for walking us through some of those key aspects and takeaways. Looking at the Q&A, the first question that kind of pops up, what are some examples of existing or successful natural infrastructure projects within the Hill Country?
Cool. Suzanne, you want to jump in on this one?
Sure. Are we going to stop sharing, Katherine?
Yeah, why don't I stop sharing? That's a great idea.
So just a few things that I would want to highlight as good examples of nature-based infrastructure. Of course, we've talked several times about the Edwards Aquifer Protection Program, which has been a huge investment by the city of San Antonio in protecting, working with landowners for, conservation of land over the recharge zone, the Edwards Aquifer Recharge Zone, and how important that is, of course, to not only protecting, reducing the development impacts, but also protecting an open space for recharge benefits. And as part of that program, there was also land that was acquired for the Government Canyon and other places like that have also provided additional recreational values to that part of the Hill Country. In addition, there are many landowners in the Hill Country that have supported conservation easements. And I want to stress the value of conservation easements, particularly as we are seeing the fragmentation happening that Katherine mentioned within our Hill Country landscapes, working directly with landowners to talk about conservation easements and the value that conservation easements can bring to conservation, but also to keeping people on the land and keeping families, having the ability for families to stay on the land and keeping that land as a working farm or ranches. These are important opportunities that check all those boxes between economics, social, as well as environmental benefits. So I would just highlight the value of conservation easements in our hill country environment. We've seen an incredible amount of those in the Pedernales watershed, for example, and other watersheds throughout the hill country. So I'll stop there and let Katherine and Rachael give some other examples of the value of nature.
Cool. Well, I can jump in. Thank you, Suzanne. Those are all fabulous examples of some of the landscape scale conservation tools and efforts that are underway. I'll just emphasize that there are much smaller localized opportunities as well. And we've got several cities represented in the participant list today. The city of Boerne has been pushing the envelope on using its ordinance making ability to really push for new development, to be at the cutting edge of using low impact development tools, managing their stormwater effectively, so that we're not flushing that water straight down into hard infrastructure that is pipes and drainage systems, but rather holding it on the land and utilizing it to the extent possible. So there are great examples across the region like that. We also talked about the urban heat island effect and the opportunity around urban forestry initiatives. There's a wonderful nonprofit organization in Austin called Tree Folks that really helps in identifying areas of need and planting trees to increase the urban canopy and reduce or mitigate the impacts of urban heat island. So great examples. I'll just point out one more in the night skies. I love that Rachael talked about the night skies because we like to celebrate the fact that folks in Central Texas are so connected to our view of the stars at night. It's the thing that inspires singer-songwriters and is really part of our cultural identity in the Hill Country. That is another great example of both opportunity and success to celebrate the number of communities that are taking a proactive stance on really protecting our view of the night sky. Rachael, you want to add anything?
I'll just expand a little bit on the ideas surrounding natural infrastructure in the Hill Country and how important this is to everything that we do. It's we have a really unique place here that takes rainwater from the sky and collects it and infiltrates it into the ground and stores it below ground and pumps it back up to our rivers and streams. It supplies our drinking water, it's our recreation, it supplies our vegetation and our wildlife. We have a rainwater refinery happening here in the Hill Country, and it happens without us having to do anything. All we have to do is protect it. And if we had to try and create this natural infrastructure through human built gray infrastructure, it would cost us trillions of dollars, lots of land space that would be needed to make this happen, to try and replicate what we get naturally just from our environment. And so we have an opportunity here in the Hill Country to really lean into our environment and all of the benefits that it gives to us, but not just from a, like woo-woo hippie perspective, but from a economic perspective and from a human health perspective and from our longevity. This is something that future generations will look back at us and say they got that really right. And we have this huge opportunity right now. So I'm very grateful to be with all of you thinking about these things and championing these actions for the future.
Well, it looks like we're just a little over time, but I would say maybe we could do one or two more quick questions, recognizing that folks may have to sign off. We only booked this meeting for 45 minutes, but Josh, let's see if we can hit one or two more.
Sure. So we've had a couple questions circling around development. And one thing that I want to kind of highlight is a question on what incentives might exist for developers, and what role will they play in terms of getting towards that, incorporating natural infrastructure into the fabric of our Hill Country and recognizing the value there.
Great. Well, I can jump on that, but would love others to chime in. It's interesting in the Hill Country and across the state of Texas, we have very different tools when we're looking at cities versus counties. So cities have a few more tools at their disposal to really guide and inform and shape development within city limits and to some extent within the ETJ. Counties are a little bit more hamstrung on what they're able to do, but we've seen some counties in the Hill Country that are grappling with the incredible rate of change, get creative with the tools that they do have. Hays County is one that has really looked at incentive-based tools to really drive new development toward a more conservation-focused practice, where rainwater harvesting is encouraged. We're limiting the use of water on outdoor landscapes is limited so that we're not using our potable water supply to irrigate lawns. Where night sky lighting, night sky friendly lighting is incorporated. So the county is really working hard to figure out how can they show developers the type of development that they want to see for their county that is respectful and responsive to the surrounding environment and drive folks in that direction. Cities have a few more tools and can really push development that thinks about, water conservation first and foremost, about capturing rainwater off of every rooftop, about recirculating and reusing water close to the surface, about protecting and utilizing native landscaping or limiting outdoor irrigation. So there are a number of tools out there, and there are resources, I'm sure, across many of the nonprofit organizations associated with the network. The Hill Country Alliance certainly has some of those resources on our website.
And Katherine, I would just add another thing that I know has been successful. And again, she mentions that counties do have, limited ordinance making ability, but there are some counties that have established like stormwater fees and other development fees, et cetera, permitting fees. And if you could incentivize in those fee structures the reduction of impervious cover, or you can move someone faster through the permitting process because they're doing more low impact development, things that time is money to developers, and the faster they can get through the process, and if they're incentivized to do that and they can save money, but also get an outcome in that development that is a win-win-win all the way around. Oftentimes developers will see that their residential designs and ultimately the subdivisions are more attractive when they have a more walkable community or more trees or access to additional amenities. All of those things can also make the neighborhood more attractive, but also can make it more sustainable by reducing runoff, reducing the impervious cover. So I would suggest really trying to think about opportunities to incentivize it through making the development cheaper and faster for developers to get through the systems in the various communities.
Thank you, everybody. Do we want to do one more question?
Sure, let's do one more.
All right. I know Rachael kind of already answered this in the typing, but I did want to kind of bring it up for the full panel. We talked about having a survey for informing the natural infrastructure plan. And so one question that came up is, what changes are we kind of seeing in terms of investment in conservation over time? And how is support changing as our population within the Hill Country increases and changes?
Well, I can jump in, but then Rachael, I didn't read what you wrote, so I would love to hear what you wrote. To say that folks increasingly are coming to the Hill Country because of the quality of life, because of the water resources and the open spaces and dark skies. And so these folks are predisposed to support any measures that are aimed at the conservation of those resources. I would say that Central Texas has consistently been among the highest in terms of nationwide support levels for public investment in conservation. When you look at things like the Trust for Public Lands, land vote resource, you can see that, you know, there's overwhelming support in Central Texas. And so that has been consistent over time. What was really telling to me was working on conservation bond measures through the pandemic, through times of great economic uncertainty where we didn't know how things were going to turn out. And both in Hays County and Kendall County seeing those bond measures pass with overwhelming support from local citizens was really an inspiring thing. We have to keep on working on that and really showing how those bond dollars are turning into real benefits for residents of the Hill Country. But I think we've got a great foundation of support to begin with. All right, Rachael, Suzanne, closing thoughts or comments?
Well, first of all, thank you so much, everybody, for joining us today. This is such an important topic, and I'm so glad we had so many people here and so many of our leaders from our communities here, because that's what it's really going to take. It's going to take us really thinking differently about the way that we develop. And I'm particularly interested in looking at the carrots, not the sticks, right? Because oftentimes when we start talking about changing the way that we develop, immediately it's looked at as, oh, more regulation. And I think there is so much opportunity in this space to do this in a way that is incentivizing developers and communities to do exactly what we've been talking about here, because it protects the quality of life that everybody wants in the areas where they've moved to. The challenge that I know a lot of people that have lived in the Hill Country for a very long time, they're frustrated by the fact that how much change has happened. So I think that if we can all get together and figure out we can still grow, we can still have economic success, we can still have the tourism and all the great things that make the Hill Country special, but we need to all collectively work together to make sure that we can protect our natural resources and ensure that that quality of life that we have loved so long is here for future generations. So I'm just encouraged to put our minds together and figure out how we can promote the value of nature here in the Hill Country.
Absolutely, Suzanne, that was amazing. That's exactly what we need to do here in the Hill Country, is come together as a community. This is a win for everything. It's a win for those 4 big buckets. It's a win for people. It's a win for municipalities. This is a win for our future generations in the Hill Country. And so by coming together, having this plan to generate that shared language and to help us strategize into the future, we have the real ability to make positive change, and it's change that everybody wants. This should be an easy win.
Cool. Sounds easy. Let's go do it. Well, thank you to my fellow panelists. I'll speak on behalf of them and the partners that are part of the Texas Hill Country Conservation Network to say our interest is creating tools that help inform not only the conservation community, but local elected officials and other stakeholders who are interested in this work. So please see the natural infrastructure as a new tool in your toolbox. Go take a look at the maps. There are county by county breakdown maps that hopefully will be helpful and informative. We will post this presentation, the slides, as well as the recording of the webinar on our txhillcountry.org. So you can find those resources there. Feel free to reach out to each of us. I know Suzanne, Rachael, myself, Josh are all really happy to connect with each of you. If we don't have the answers, if you've got follow-up questions, we can point you in the right direction. So thank you especially to Josh and to Leah Cuddyback from the Hill Country Alliance team for all of the behind the scenes, the magic that makes a webinar flow. You guys are great. All right. Thank you all. I think that's a wrap.